A chance encounter meeting unknown operator, which was an interview on my past as an operator HPS. Enjoy the story. This was definitely one of my biggest parts of my dark past. I hope you enjoy the story, written by a guy we encountered while we were in Mexico. Thank you, he wrote the story very well and captured it after an operation that I would, dear you to my heart, handwrite. The air hung heavy with the scent of tequila and dust as I navigated the crowded streets of Juarez, Mexico. The year was 2011, and the city was a tinderbox of cartel violence, teetering on the brink of chaos. I was there to document the escalating conflict, the fear etched on the faces of its citizens. It was during this time in a dimly lit cantina that I first encountered unknown operator, a seasoned journalist with a penchant for uncovering hidden truths, was a wellspring of information about the city's underbelly. He spoke of shadowy figures operating in the background, ex-military men contracted to protect wealthy businessmen and their families from the ever-present threat of the cartels. These were not soldiers of fortune, he explained, but highly trained professionals, ghosts in the machine of modern warfare. Intrigued, I pressed him for more. Who were these men? What motivated them to operate in such a dangerous world? Operator, ever the enigmatic storyteller, simply smiled and said, "Let me introduce you to a couple of friends." That evening, in a secluded back room of a local bar, I met two men who would forever change my understanding of modern warfare. They were American, veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were private military contractors. Juarez, a city under siege. To understand the world these men inhabited, one must first understand the battleground that was Juarez in 2011. The city had become synonymous with violence, a grim illustration of the drug war ravaging Mexico. The Juarez cartel, a ruthless criminal organization, held the city hostage, their influence seeping into every facet of life. Beheadings, kidnappings, and gun battles were commonplace, a terrifying symphony of brutality that played out daily on the city's streets. The police, outgunned and outmaneuvered, were powerless to stop the bloodshed. Fear was the currency of the day, a suffocating blanket that stifled any hope of normalcy. It was into this cauldron of chaos that the private military contractors, or PMCs as they were known, had been thrust. Hired by wealthy individuals and corporations desperate for protection, these men operated in the shadows, their presence a silent testament to the government's inability to ensure the safety of its citizens. Shadows in the night, the American operators. The two men Rick introduced me to were the epitome of military efficiency. They moved with a quiet confidence, their eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing every potential threat. Their names, they told me, were John and Mark, though I suspected these were aliases, adopted for their own safety. Both were veterans of the US Army's elite special operations units, their bodies bearing the scars of battles fought in distant lands. They were men of few words, their responses to my questions clipped and precise. They were not there to make friends, they reminded me, but to do a job. Their job, they explained, was to protect their clients from harm, no matter the cost. Over the course of several tense hours, fueled by cheap beer and nervous energy, they shared snippets of their lives as PMCs. They spoke of firefights with cartel gunmen, of close calls and narrow escapes. They described their work with a chilling detachment, their words devoid of bravado or remorse. They were professionals, they stressed, trained to operate in a world where violence was not the exception, but the norm. Whispers of war tales from the front line. John, the older of the two, recounted a recent operation that sent shivers down my spine. They had been hired to rescue the kidnapped son of a prominent Mexican businessman. The boy, he explained, had been taken from his school by cartel operatives, his abductors demanding a hefty ransom for his safe return. The operation, John explained, had been fraught with danger. They had tracked the kidnappers to a remote ranch house outside the city, infiltrating the compound under the cover of darkness. A tense standoff ensued, culminating in a brief but brutal firefight. They had managed to secure the boy's release, John said, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't elaborate on the fate of the kidnappers, and I didn't ask. It was clear that these men operated in a world where life and death were fluid concepts, where the lines between right and wrong blurred under the harsh realities of their profession. Honduran intervention, a dangerous game. Mark, usually the quieter of the two, opened up about their work in Honduras, where they had been contracted by a multinational corporation to provide security for a palm oil plantation. The local population, he explained, had been resisting the company's expansion into their ancestral lands, leading to violent clashes. Their role, Mark explained, was not to take sides, but to protect the company's assets and personnel. They had trained the local security forces, he said, and had even participated in operations to quell unrest. The work, he admitted, had been morally challenging. They were, in essence, complicit in the displacement of indigenous communities, their actions contributing to the very conflict they were hired to mitigate. It was a moral tightrope they walked, he confessed, one that weighed heavily on their consciences. From soldier to contractor, a growing market. John and Mark's stories offered a chilling glimpse into the shadowy world of private military contracting. Their experiences, I soon learned, were not isolated incidents, but rather indicative of a growing trend. The demand for private military skills, they explained, had skyrocketed in the years following the 9/11 attacks. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan had created a new generation of highly trained soldiers, men and women skilled in the art of combat. As these veterans returned home, many found themselves struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. The skills they had honed on the battlefield, skills that were once in high demand, were no longer relevant in a peacetime economy. The private military industry, however, offered an alternative. Companies like Blackwater, DynCorp, and Triple Canopy were more than happy to employ these veterans, offering lucrative salaries and the promise of adventure. For many veterans, the allure of high pay and the adrenaline rush of combat proved too tempting to resist. The price of freedom, risks and rewards. The work, however, came at a steep price. Private military contractors operated in some of the most dangerous corners of the world, facing risks that most civilians could scarcely comprehend. They were constantly in harm's way, targeted by insurgents, criminals, and even hostile governments. The pay, while substantial, was often seen as meager compensation for the risks involved. Death or serious injury was an occupational hazard, and those who survived often carried the physical and psychological scars of their experiences long after their contracts had ended. Moreover, the legal and ethical considerations of their profession were complex and often murky. Unlike soldiers, who are bound by the Geneva Conventions and subject to military law, PMCs operated in a legal grey area. Their actions were often shrouded in secrecy, making it difficult to hold them accountable for any wrongdoing. Moral ambiguity, navigating the ethical grey zone. The use of private military contractors raised a host of ethical questions. Critics argued that the privatization of warfare eroded state sovereignty, allowing corporations to profit from conflict. They pointed to instances where PMCs had been accused of human rights abuses, operating with impunity in war-torn countries. Proponents, on the other hand, argued that PMCs provided a valuable service, filling critical gaps in military capabilities. They pointed out that PMCs allowed governments to wage war without the political fallout of deploying their own troops. The debate over the use of PMCs was complex and multifaceted, with no easy answers. It was clear, however, that the industry was here to stay, a testament to the changing nature of warfare in the 21st century. The future of warfare, privatizing conflict. As I bid farewell to John and Mark that night, their words continued to echo in my mind. The world they inhabited, a world of shadows and violence, was both terrifying and strangely alluring. It was a world where the lines between right and wrong blurred, where the pursuit of profit often trumped the pursuit of justice. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. What did the rise of private military contractors say about the future of warfare? Were these men modern-day mercenaries, profiting from chaos? Or were they simply filling a void left by governments, unwilling or unable to confront the challenges of a rapidly changing world? One thing was certain. The world was witnessing a fundamental shift in the way wars were fought. The traditional battlefield was disappearing, replaced by a complex web of non-state actors, proxy wars and shadowy covert operations. Invisible guardians, The impact of private military contractors. The impact of private military contractors on global security was undeniable. They were the invisible guardians of a new world order, their presence felt in conflict zones across the globe. From providing security for diplomats and aid workers to training foreign armies and conducting covert operations, PMCs had become an integral part of the modern military-industrial complex. Their influence extended far beyond the battlefield. The skills and expertise they possessed were in high demand, not just by governments and corporations, but also by humanitarian organizations and even private citizens. The world of private military contracting was a complex and often contradictory one. It was a world where patriotism and profit intersected, where the pursuit of peace often went hand in hand with the waging of war. A necessary evil? The debate continues. The debate over the role of private military contractors in modern warfare was likely to continue for years to come. Were they a necessary evil, a pragmatic solution to the challenges of a chaotic world? Or were they a dangerous precedent, a slippery slope towards the normalization of violence and the erosion of state authority? The answers to these questions were complex and multifaceted. There were no easy solutions, no black and white answers. The world of private military contracting was a grey zone, a place where the lines between right and wrong were often blurred. As I reflect on my encounter with John and Mark, I am left with a profound sense of unease. The world they inhabit, a world of shadows and violence, is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the human cost of conflict. It is a world that we must strive to understand, for it is a world that increasingly is becoming our own.